Alright, we're back in the pit to run the gauntlet. We got another request from one of the patrons, CJHRT. He says, looking back at the older Don't Sleeps in the recent videos, it made me curious. In the story, it says Kirei and Kiritsugu have potential to beat some caster and assassin class servants. Could you expand on this further, and if possible, give examples of the level of these servants? And this is referring back to a quote that I put in the Don't Sleeps. There's a part of the Ironsburn consultation room where a young Taiga is asking whether or not they can go up against servants, and Irie explained outright yes they can, and she even goes as far to say they could go up against the knight class if everything leaned in their favor, but that would have to be the most favorable of circumstances ever. The stars align, they hit the Powerball, so on and so forth. And Irie explained straight up they have a very good chance against assassin if their presence has been revealed, or if it's a caster that's in close combat. And this is something that's been confirmed years ago. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the channel memberships or the Patreon. You get access to early content and you get priority on your requests. Now, getting off into it, we're going to be looking at a mid-tier servant from each category. And the thought process behind this is that I don't want somebody that's so bad that they can't defend themselves, but I also don't want somebody that's so good that it's like, why do you even have them going against that servant? Somewhere smooth in the middle. So for the caster, we're going to be looking at Charles Babbage. We know that Kirei and Kiritsugu are not only experienced in the field, but they have the wisdom. They've been in it since they were children. So if anybody could pull this off, it's definitely them. Babbage, in his case, may come off as a servant that's on the weaker side, but he has a lot going for himself. He has a reality marble. He can constantly emit steam from his body. He's clad in armor that not only defends him from regular attacks, but also buffs up his endurance and his defense. He can shoot out many automaton minions to go after the person. He can fly through the help of his steam by propelling himself into the air with it. Tons of things at his disposal. And on top of that, of course, he has the home court advantage because of the steam. He could be flying around above them in the steam and still have awareness while they're still trying to figure out what's going on. For Kiritsugu, as I mentioned before, he's clad in armor. That little combat knife that he runs with isn't gonna do anything to Babbage. Regular bullets, all of that. So immediately he's casted out into a position where he has to facilitate something at far range. The good side is what Babbage doesn't know is that he can manipulate time. So let's say that the fight is at the wharf in phase 0 and Babbage comes out, he steams out the whole wharf and it's just him and Kiritsugu. In the event that Babbage shows up near him, Kiritsugu can just manipulate time and escape the same way that he did against Kanan. So despite him having that advantage over him in terms of the field, it's not necessarily a sure way to corner Kiritsugu exactly, where if it had been somebody else, he probably could have got it off. It's going to be more difficult to trap him in. Kiritsugu's biggest issue will be laying down the final hit. Now, it is stated that Babbage is on the slower side because of his armor. So Kiritsugu does have that to his advantage. Not only that, but Babbage is huge. You can't miss him. So despite all the steam, once he pops out in the open, he's like a walking bullseye. In my mind, I'm thinking that Kiritsugu would make the attempt to bring out his night vision, preferably his thermal scope, and use some type of mirror to throw Babbage off, but also keep him in contact at all times, at least so he knows where he's at. And when he's finally able to put himself in position, he'll pierce Babbage with his origin bullet, and then at that point, all of his powers will be done. At best, Babbage would rely on his minions, but at that point, it's not gonna do anything for him. Because remember, Babbage's reality marble is continuous. It just keeps on going, whether he wants it to or not. So in that light, it works to his disadvantage against Kiritsugu at all times. Even when Kiritsugu went up against Kanev, he at least had to wait for Kanev to activate his Hydrodrome. With Babbage, all he has to do is wait for the right time. And also, it even says in Babbage's profile projectile that he can't take the armor off. It's one with him. So if you neutralize the armor, you neutralize him. It's finished. And of course, Kiritsugu could do things like rely on his explosives, but I think him relying on his origin bullet is a lot more realistic. So when he puts them down, he stays down. Servants deal with things like explosives all the time, and there's no guarantee that that's gonna seal the deal for him, even if he does get it off. Maybe it's some type of lead up, but not the final, especially with the increased defense. Now, Babbage does have access to some pretty damaging long range attacks, but it's highly unlikely that he's gonna get those off on Kiritsugu or Kirei unless there's some type of intervention to throw them off, because those two are always in their element. They're always ready. I mean, if you think back to the time that Irisville was able to trap Kirei when he was going against Maya. Why? Because she snuck up out of nowhere. When Kirei was going against Maya on his own, it was like she was going against the boogeyman. Like, he had her running and ducking behind corners, and he's just slow walking, just waiting for something to happen. And even then, she still needed Kiritsugu to bail her out. As far as Kirei goes for the Babbage fight, this actually works a lot more in his favor than Kiritsugu, mainly because he specializes in close range combat. So now, what would work in Babbage's favor, or at least what's supposed to work in his favor against Kirei, now works against him, because all Kirei has to do is reinforce himself with one of his command spells and basically one-shot him. And he has been shown doing as such. As a matter of fact, many people may not realize it, or they just flat out ignore it. Kirei was actually the one that won the fight against Kiritsugu, if you really know the story. In the novel, it says that when Kirei did that punch on Kiritsugu that threw him into the wall, he actually killed him. It was Avalon that brought Kiritsugu back to life after the fact and allowed him to come back around and circle for his win. But if he didn't have Avalon, Kiritsugu won that fight. It literally brought him back to life. So when you talk about somebody being lethal up close, you put a command spell on Kirei and have him gouge out his spiritual core in the same way that he did with Da Vinci and FGO, Babbage turns to nothing. The only problem is, again, Babbage has territorial advantage and abundance of power and defense, and he has ranged attacks, but that's nothing that either one of them can't deal with. As far as our assassin goes, I'm going to be using Danzo from the Shimosa chapter. So we know that Danzo is a ninja, meaning she's specializing at both close range and long range combat, surveillance. She's extremely fast. She has her kunai, her shurikens, and they would both be dealing with a situation where it's the exact opposite of Babbage, which makes it super interesting, because Babbage was slow with a lot of power. Danzo would be extremely fast, but her frame would be weaker. But at this point, it would be them having the ability to catch up with her despite having the advantage of this servant constitution that she has. And that's something that neither one of them have been shown to deal with. Neither one of them has dealt with speedy opponents. All of their opponents have been realistic, so to speak. And even then, you got the scene in Heaven's Field where Kirei was pushing 30 miles per hour through the forest against Hassan while he was carrying Ilya. So he'd run even faster without that weight. So when it comes to speed, I do think that this gives her the upper hand in general, but I don't think that that counts them out for the fight. As we saw, Kirei is willing to take a bullet to the face, to the hand, to the chest, and if Kiritsugu could, I'm sure he would do the same. Her speed isn't anything that's gonna scare them off. It's more so putting themselves in position to land a decent blow with her doing all of this moving around, because that's just what ninjas do. She has her ninjutsu, she has her genjutsu, and worst of all, one thing that they both have to worry about is her second phantasm, which is something that doesn't get highlighted often, even in story, because she doesn't want to use it. Danzo has a phantasm where she can decapitate you at a distance just by envisioning it. I'm not kidding, look it up. But considering the type of character that she is, I know for a fact that she wouldn't use this unless she just absolutely had her back against the wall, because that's just the way that she is. She even lied about what it actually does for that very reason. But in the circumstance that they are able to somewhat trap her, maybe Kirei pulls out his black keys. You know, black keys have a ton of manipulations. I've had a whole video covering that. If Kirei does this, boxes her in, and then catches her by surprise, he could get a good blow off that way. For Kiritsugu, it would still be a lot harder because even with his time alter, it would be a matter of him playing bait and still outmatching that speed once she realizes what's going on. And he doesn't time alter for that long. He does it in bursts. I think a good alternative for Kiritsugu, and he has been shown doing this, would be to tap the nearby radio waves in a way that it would cause some type of malfunction to Danzo's body, because Danzo is a robot at the end of the day. She's a mechanical doll. I mean, Kiritsugu is so dirty, he would find a way to bring her to a body of water and get that to splash on her or drown her in it, and at that point her best assets become just as ineffective, because once her speed is gone, she's done. And honestly, I don't even think he would need his origin bullet for her, because he's got rounds that you would need a tank to stop. So just regular shots in a well-placed scenario will put him on top. Same thing goes for Kirei. This on the flip side should prove to be more difficult for him because she's doing all these evasive maneuvers, but he's dealt with much worse, being an executor for the church. Demons, vampires, some of the worst mages you can think of. I highly doubt this would prove to be an issue for him. And they're not the only ones that I feel like Kirei and Kiritsugu could go against, whether it be a one-on-one or a two-on-two, because Siege didn't exactly specify how he wanted the fight to go. I'm just assuming that he wants it head up. I think they both can take it.